The only thing that was missing was a live from New York. It's Saturday night. Welcome to NFL Fantasy Live. I'm Marcus Grant alongside Adam Rank and Michael F. Florio. We got a big wait. I'm being told that we have pictures of Devontae Adams coming in right now. Can we put that up? Take a look at that. Oh, yeah. There he is, carrying all of our fantasy teams. Wow. What an achievement. You know, after the game, he said he believes he is the best wide receiver in football, and he says he will end, I'm actually should ask you, will he end as the top wide receiver in fantasy? Adam Rank, what say you on that?
You know, can I give you a take on this? Because I've got a legitimate take. Okay, first of all, everybody was upset with the Packers GM when he didn't draft a wide receiver, and then this week when they didn't draft for Will Fuller. But as a parent, as a father, I kind of now understand where he's coming from, because I have to tell my kids all the time, why am I buying you more toys? You're only playing with this one thing. And that's exactly what Aaron Rodgers is doing. He only throws the ball to Devontae Adams. So why do you need any other wide receivers? You're fine.
That is certainly a take.
Yeah.
I don't know if I could disagree with it. Florio, how do you feel about this?
I think is he the best wide receiver in the league? That's up for debate, but is he the best wide receiver in fantasy? Yeah. Remember how good Michael Thomas was last year? Devontae Adams is averaging 5 more fantasy points per game this year.
I know sometimes we can be subject to recency bias, but with what he's done, he has to at least be in the conversation for fantasy MVP. Anyway, we will get back to the Thursday night game in just a little bit, but first, let's dig into our Sunday Showdown. The hour we will preview the entire slate of games for Sunday for Fantasy Manager. So we'll start with the Ravens and the Colts. And Florio, how are you feeling about starting guys up against that Indy defense?
Yeah, I learned last week the hard way that Lamar Jackson of 2020 is not the same as Lamar Jackson of 2019. And this matchup is even tougher this week. The Colts have allowed the fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks. They're limiting passing yards and touchdowns each week. Lamar himself isn't even throwing 200 on average per game. And the Colts have allowed just one top 10 quarterback this year. You may not be able to get away from him, but I don't think you're going to be too happy with the results this week.
Florio, bro, Lamar Jackson is a must start. I understand the FPA over the course of the season for the Colts, but last week, Stafford hit him for 336 and 3. The game before, Joe Burrow threw for over 300 yards against them. I look at Lamar Jackson as having a great game. I don't know if he'll get 300 passing yards. He'll throw more touchdowns than Burrow did. He's also got the great floor of running the football. So, of course, you've got to start Lamar Jackson this week. Don't be scared of that Colts defense.
Like an early preview of Breaking the Ranks coming up later on in the show. Intriguing matchup between the Seahawks and the Bills. And I tell you, I think Gabriel Davis is a sleeper for this Buffalo offense. He's really come on of late. Plus, we have the old trope this season of starting all your wide receivers against this Seattle defense. Now, Jamal Adams is back, but he's likely going to be paying a lot of attention to Stephon Diggs, trying to slow him down. Plus, Davis leads the team in end zone targets with 4, so if you're really hurting at wide receiver, he could be an option for you.
Marcus, bro. Actually, that's a really good pick. I like that one. No, I really like that one. I'm going to steal that for player stories on the all-new NFL Fantasy app, by the way. Anyways, Tyler Lockett, I know is very frustrating because he's great one week. He's not so great. He's hot and he's cold. I think it was Katy Perry who sang a song about that. Great video. Anyways, I can't keep him on the bench. Like, it doesn't matter. I know that the inconsistency is there, but he is second in the NFL with 7 receiving touchdowns. And it's frustrating. And again, I go back to the parent example of like you have these 2 kids that you always have to acquiesce to. Like, one week you get to pick a movie, one week you do. And I know at some point these two receivers are going to come together, Tyler and DK, and you can start them both in the same week. I think it's going to be this week against the Bills.
All right, we move on to the Sunday night game. That's Saints against the Bucks. Antonio Brown gets his first shot for Tampa Bay. So would you start him, Rank?
Rank, bro. Oh wait, that's me. Yeah, you know what? I'm starting Antonio Brown this week, and I understand we haven't seen him play in quite a long time. But think about the last time we did see him when he was a member of the New England Patriots. There was a lot of consternation of whether we were going to start him in that game against Miami or not. And my whole reason was that, to start him, was that Tom Brady is going to try to get him involved as early as possible to help him feel like he's a part of the offense because it's important moving forward. And I think we're in the same situation here. I think he's got a nice, safe floor. I think 5 receptions, somewhere between 50 to 60 yards is doable. That'll give you double-digit fantasy points. If they get near the goal line, Tom Brady is going to target him. And if he gets that touchdown, all of a sudden he's going to have a big game. So I say that you have to start him.
Frank, bro, I like that call. But what I don't like this week is Drew Brees. He put up a season low in fantasy points in week 1 against the Bucs. The Bucs this year are allowing the second fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks, and they've allowed just one top 10 quarterback all season long. I'm saying sit Drew Brees, and he just hasn't been the same this year. Don't put him in your fantasy line.
Another NFC South team with the Panthers taking on the Chiefs. We expect Christian McCaffrey to make his return to the field, but I'm looking at Robbie Anderson kind of as a beware. I mean, he was great to start the season with 99 or more receiving yards in 4 of his first 5, but he's had fewer than 80 receiving yards in 3 straight, hasn't had a touchdown since week 1, and only 4 wide receivers all year have gotten above 70 yards against this Kansas City defense, so this could be tough sledding for Robbie Anderson.
I know Clyde Edwards-Helaire disappointed last week, but it was his worst game of the season. It happens. Before that, he had scored 11 fantasy points in every single game, and we were all worried about Le'Veon Bell. That just hasn't really come to fruition. Bell has played 33 and 26% of the snaps, so this is still CEH's backfield, and the matchup is great. The Panthers have allowed the 3rd most fantasy points per game, the 4th most yards, and they've allowed the most top 5 running back finishes this season. I say start Clyde Edwards-Helaire again this week.
I feel like people should have that vote of confidence for CEH. By the way, if the guy that you're relying on this week has not been mentioned yet, don't worry. All fantasy precincts are not yet reporting yet. We're going to have more on these games as we go through the hour on NFL Fantasy Live. In the meantime, let's get you a few news headlines just in case you missed it on this Friday. We will start in Tampa. Bucs head coach Bruce Arians says he expects Chris Godwin will be recovered enough from his finger surgery to play this Sunday night against New Orleans. Now, Rank, you said you'd start Antonio Brown earlier. How do you feel about Chris Godwin?
You know what? I would feel good about him as well. I think this is going to be a high-volume passing attack. I think that the player who's probably going to be left out of this mix is Mike Evans because he was so touchdown dependent over the course of the first 7-8 games. He's obviously second in the NFL with 7 receiving touchdowns. So I feel good about Godwin. I think he's going to get volume. I think they're going to try to get Antonio Brown in. And if there, again, one guy that I'm worried about, it's Mike Evans.
Up to Seattle, or the Seahawks have ruled out both Chris Carson and Carlos Hyde, who will miss their 2nd straight game. Now, Rank, last week, DJ Dallas was the man for Seattle. Do you see good things for him again this week?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I would go back to that one. We were kind of waiting to see how this was going to shake out. Now, obviously, you're not rooting for injuries or anything like that, but you do want a clear path. You do want to be able to say, this is going to be the player who's going to end up getting the most production. Now, Travis Homer could come in out of nowhere, but I'm really confident in DJ. I thought he played really well, and so I think this matchup's good enough. It lends itself to getting him into the lineup. So if you had him, you picked him up last week, and you did well, and he did good for you, put him in your lineup again.
Sounds like a plan. All right, Sam Darnold says he feels all right after practice today. The Jets are still monitoring to see how he feels before naming him a starter officially. But if he's on the field, Michael F. Florio, what does that mean for the Jetropolitans in fantasy?
Yeah, I think it's obviously better if Darnold is healthy and active than if he isn't. They average just 5 points per game when Joe Flacco starts. But for me, there's not a whole lot of fantasy appeal here. Primarily, you want to trust the slot receivers if Jamison Crowder plays, if not Braxton Berrios, because Darnold throws to the slot on 36% of his throws.
Somewhat mixed messages out of Dallas today about Ezekiel Elliott. Coach Mike McCarthy says Zeke's hamstring is feeling better, but he didn't do as much in practice as expected. That Zeke will warm up before the game on Sunday to make sure he's good to go, but is officially listed as questionable. If you have Zeke, you're going to have these headaches, I think, for the rest of the year because this offense is struggling and you're going to worry about his role. Doesn't help that he's facing a really good defense in Pittsburgh, but chances are you don't have a lot of better options on your roster, so you're probably going to be starting him. You might not like it. Florio, I don't know how you feel. Same, different? How's you feeling?
I feel like you do. If Zeke plays, I think you have to use him. Pick up Tony Pollard just in case, but the matchup is so rough. The offense has been sputtering as of late. I don't know if you're going to love the production you get this week.
Let's take a look at some of the other practice reports from around the league. We know that Kenyon Drake is out, Gardner Minshew out as well. See, Devontae Freeman will not be available. Mark Ingram doubtful. Kenny Golladay out with his hip injury. T.Y. Hilton doubtful, but not looking likely to play. Calvin Ridley questionable. Michael Thomas also questionable with that ankle injury. Rank, real quick, if Michael Thomas plays for the Saints, does he play for you?
Absolutely. I have no hesitation. It's a tough matchup, but Michael Thomas has been one of the best receivers in football over the last number of years. If he's playing for the Saints, he's playing for you.
All right, let's get back to Thursday Night Football. It's a pretty one-sided affair, but lots of fantasy implications. So Devontae Adams being that one toy that Aaron Rodgers likes to play with. Talk about what he did last night, Rank.
Yeah, it's pretty ridiculous to think about this. I mean, just being targeted 12 times is one thing. Hauling in 10 of them, the receiving yards, just thinking of how good his game was, and they still threw 2 touchdown passes to MVS. Like, that literally could have gone to Devontae Adams, and we'd be talking about an all-time game. And this is an interesting note as well. Even with missing 2 games, he's on pace for the second most fantasy points by a wide receiver in a single season in NFL history. Jerry Rice in 1995 was the only one who's done it better. And he has missed 2 games.
Yeah, and Rank, his quarterback, the only guy that throws him the ball, Aaron Rodgers, put up nearly 29 fantasy points yesterday, over 300 yards and 4 touchdowns. It was his 4th game with 4 more touchdowns. But as someone who started Aaron Jones last night, I thought Aaron Rodgers was being a little selfish because 2 of those touchdown passes, they came on the 1-yard line. I kind of wish he handed one off, but Aaron Rodgers is an obvious must-start quarterback each week going forward.
Well, don't worry about him handing it off. He doesn't need to do that. He was just fine, and I say that selfishly. I had to make the tough call between Aaron Rodgers and Justin Herbert. So far, it looks like a pretty good idea. Marquez Valdez-Scantling, though. I know this is a Marcus Grant special, and I knew yesterday on Fantasy Live when Marcus was finally like, you know what, I think I'm done with them. I'm like, pencil in MVS for a pair of touchdowns, which is always the way that this goes. You know what, though? This is what happens. Like this, it's a rotating cast of who is going to get multiple touchdowns in a game. Sometimes it's Aaron Jones. Sometimes it's Bob Tunyon. And last night it was MVS. So, Alan Lazard, when you return, you're going to get a pair of touchdowns.
I know Richie James sounds like a guy who hangs out in Riverdale, but he's honest to goodness a wide receiver for the 49ers and had a huge game last night. The 9 for 184 and a touchdown. That was on 13 targets. Now, don't get too excited about it because you compare that to his whole 2019 season. He had 6 catches for 165 and a touchdown and 10 targets. That was over a full season. So what happened last night was great. But he's going to be pushed back down the depth chart when Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, and Kendrick Bourne return. So if you are the one person out there who took advantage of this last night, congratulations to you.
And so much for tired legs, right? Jerick McKinnon last night was out there taking the bulk of the carries, the snaps, and everything. He's looking like the running back to trust right now in San Francisco until Raheem Mostert comes back.
It's time for Breaking the Ranks with Adam Rank and NFL.com fantasy player rankings guru Michael F. Florio. Now, every single week, Florio goes through and ranks every single fantasy relevant player based on their potential, and then Adam Rank comes through and finds something to complain about. It's a real Felix Unger, Oscar Madison sort of situation between the two of them. So we'll start with the quarterbacks this week. Rank, was there anything in Florio's rankings that stood out to you?
Everything. No, it's nothing like that. Wait, which one was Felix? Was that Matthew Perry or was that the other guy? Anyways, here's my thing. I liked Florio's rankings this week. I thought he did a really nice job. The only thing that really stood out to me, because I will go back like Derek Carr, I thought should have been a tough guy, but the one thing that stands out is Kyler Murray. Not that I think he's bad, not that I think he's a bad player or anything like that. Why is he number 2 ahead of guys like Deshaun Watson, who I think should actually be the number 2 quarterback this week?
Yeah, I have Kyler Murray at 2 because, first, he's averaging just under 28 fantasy points per game, and he has scored 21 in every single game, so that's such a safe starting point. And then we already know that he's the goal line back here, but I think with Kenyon Drake expected to be out this week, he could run even more. Chase Edmonds is a good pass catcher. I like him in the backfield, but they haven't really asked him to run a whole lot this year. So maybe Murray runs a little bit more. And my biggest question is, would I be Matthew Perry in that reference?
No, I'm the Matthew Perry. Like, if I had hair, I would actually look like him. So,
I mean, could Michael F. Florio be any more Matthew Perry? Sorry, I had to. Now, so next we go to running backs, and am I reading this right? Am I
yes.
Rank? Are you saying that a Chicago Bear is ranked too highly here?
Yeah, he should be number 1 in your hearts, but I don't think he should be number 11 in your fantasy rankings this week. Let me tell you something right now. David Montgomery is the best running back in the NFL. Watch him run behind that offensive line. And that was last week's offensive line. It's getting worse because of injuries and other situations. This Bears offensive line has been decimated. I don't even know who's going to start for them. I don't know if they're just going to have Akeem Hicks and Khalil Mack go out there and try to block for some people. It's a dire situation. So I love David Montgomery. He has earned every single yard he has gained this season, but it's just crazy. I can't see him being that high this week.
No, I get the concerns with the O-line. It was painful to watch him get stuffed at the goal line multiple times last week, but he's getting big volume right now, 19 plus carries in 2 of his last 3 games. Since Tariq Cohen's gone down, he has seen at least 5 targets in every single game. And the Titans have allowed a top 14 running back in 5 of their last 7 games. So I just need a little bit more than top 14, and David Montgomery will live up to that expectation.
All right, so we'll check out the wide receivers next. And DJ Moore, I know, got off to a slow start. He's maybe been better than people expected lately. So you're saying that maybe he needs some more respect put on his name by Florio there, huh?
Yeah, because this is a tough matchup against the Chiefs, and I know he gave some respect to Robbie Anderson, who to me is kind of trending down. I thought last week that DJ Moore, that even though he didn't put up the points, especially not until the end of the game, I thought that because he ran a lot more of those underneath routes, 66% of his routes came on slants and ins, that I think that if Teddy Bridgewater can connect with him and get the ball out of his hands quickly, that DJ can actually have a pretty good game this week.
I get it. I just, for one, DJ Moore hasn't really lived up to expectations this year. He's the wide receiver 27 on the season, and I hate his floor. He has finished with single-digit fantasy points in half of his games this year, and the Chiefs are just a tough matchup, allowing the 4th fewest points to wide receivers. So he's one of these always has a high upside wide receivers, but the floor just isn't really there.
Hopefully he gets more to the ceiling than the floor, but I understand certainly the consternation there. All right, so despite Rank splitting hairs as he does, Florio's rankings are certainly a great resource. You can check him out at NFL.com/fantasy to get the full list of his player rankings. In the meantime, we'll get back to our Sunday showdowns, and we will go with the Bears and the Titans. And I'm telling you, I'm worried, and I would consider sitting Ryan Tannehill. I mean, after a good start and a nice run, he's had fewer than 18 fantasy points in back-to-back games, and he's facing a Bears defense that's allowed, on paper, the 5th fewest fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. But if you take out Taysom Hill's points last week, because he wasn't technically playing quarterback at the time, they would be the 2nd fewest fantasy points allowed to the position. Only 1 quarterback has scored more than 17 points against the Bears this year, so I am really worried about Ryan Tannehill.
I completely get that, Marcus. And someone I like on the other side of the ball is deep sleeper for me, Anthony Miller. He had 11 targets last week, but what I really like about him is the Titans have allowed the 2nd most fantasy points to wide receivers this year, but specifically the 2nd most to slot receivers, which is where Miller runs 88% of his routes. And if that Bears O-line is, an issue this week, I expect a lot of quick, short passes to Anthony Miller.
We got a divisional matchup out west. Raiders, Chargers, Flores, Coryell. Wait, no, sorry. Anyway, who are you starting in this one, Rank?
The Battle of LA. Well, sort of. One former LA team, a current LA team. But I like Mike Williams in this contest. 21 fantasy points in 2 of his last 3 games. Of course, one of the reasons he's had 100 receiving yards in 2 of those 3 games. Of course, having 3 receiving touchdowns total during that stretch. Really, what we've been looking for Mike Williams is a little bit of consistency. And I think that having Justin Herbert as the starting quarterback, we're going to start seeing more of that. We're going to finally start seeing some of the promise that we had in him when the Chargers used such a high draft pick on him. So I really love Mike Williams this week.
I like Mike Williams a lot too, Rank. And this is a player I know you've been excited about in the past. I think Hunter Renfrow is a sleeper this week going up against the Chargers. Renfrow is the primary slot receiver for the Raiders, and the Chargers have allowed the 5th most fantasy points to slot receivers, including allowing 85 yards per game to receivers lined up in the slot. He's got some volume upside here this week.
Go to Steelers and Cowboys. Dallas will have a new starter at quarterback, even if we don't completely know who it is. But regardless of who is slinging the rock, the Steelers defense is a must start. We have talked repeatedly about the problems along that offensive line for the Cowboys, and whether it is Cooper Rush or Garrett Gilbert, I am not confident that the Cowboy quarterback is going to be able to move the football the way we saw Dak do early in the season. So I expect the Steelers to pin their ears back to come after whomever it is and put up some decent fantasy points this week.
It feels like if the Steelers don't score 20 points for you, that's going to be a huge disappointment. But I don't believe there's going to be any disappointment with Juju Smith-Schuster. I feel like he's now moved into the point here where he's a very safe option week in, week out. He's had at least 11 targets per game and 8 receptions per game since week 7. The Cowboys have allowed the 7th most fantasy points per game this season. Again, I see him as a guy who's going to get somewhere right around 11 points without a touchdown, and that touchdown would just put him over the top.
Would love to see it. As for Juju's quarterback, Big Ben enters week 9 as the QB 22, and he hasn't finished as a top 15 fantasy quarterback in any week since week 5, but Maurice Jones-Drew says that might be about to change. It's time for Feel Good Friday. MJD, what do you got?
Well, thanks, Marcus. I appreciate it. Now, this is for everyone out there that's been worried about Big Ben. No reason to. No reason. Let me show you why. Hit the music. Roll the tape. Here we go. Big Ben, Deontay Johnson at the top of the screen. Now, I'm going to show you some big plays here. Now, this isn't, it may look like old Big Ben here, but this is young Big Ben. Watch him scramble, get outside the pocket, throw the ball off of one leg, a dime to Deontay Johnson down the field. That's what I'm talking about. Here, he sees Claypool one-on-one with the linebacker, 2 high safeties. He knows that he has it one-on-one. He's playing so fast with these young receivers. Look, he gets the ball out quick, gives the receiver an opportunity to go out and make plays. The reason I'm showing you this is because the Dallas Cowboys defense has been giving up big plays all season long. If you have Big Ben, this is the week to start him, and he has a favorable schedule going forward. He may be your starter.
Welcome back to NFL Fantasy Live. And, the tight end position has gotten shallower than a puddle on a Phoenix sidewalk in July. So anybody who needs help at the position, here are my 5 tight ends that you can stream in week 9. We'll start at number 5 with Logan Thomas. And I know the production hasn't matched the opportunity, and sometimes it seems like he's just out there getting his steps in. But Thomas is second on the team in targets and air yards, and he's facing a Giants defense that's given up 85-plus receiving yards to tight ends in consecutive games. At number 4, it's Trey Burton. Since week 4, he's 3rd on the Colts in targets. He leads the team in receptions and actually has a pair of rushing touchdowns. Baltimore, I know, seems like a tough matchup, but they've given up a touchdown to the tight end position in back-to-back games. Number 3, it's an oldie but a goodie. It's Greg Olsen now with the Seattle Seahawks. And believe it or not, he's actually 3rd on the team in targets this season. And the Bills have given up the 6th most fantasy points per game to tight ends, 6 touchdowns. That's tied for 3rd most allowed. Number 2 is Jordan Akins. I know he doesn't immediately spring to mind, but when he's healthy, he's Houston's tight end 1. Was 2nd on the team in receptions through the first 4 weeks before being hurt, and he's facing the Jaguars, who've given up 7 touchdowns to tight ends. That's 2nd most in the NFL. And at number 1, we're going with Eric Ebron, 3rd most targets on the team in Pittsburgh, the 2nd most receptions. And look, we just want to take as many shots against this Dallas defense as we possibly can. So Eric Ebron's a guy that you might want to get into your lineup. All right, for all you daily players, it's time to make a day of it. Kimmy checks. How are we going to make the most of our Sunday?
Thanks so much, Marcus. I'm here with Cynthia Freeland, and we took a look at the live slate of Sunday games for all of you daily fantasy users. Cynthia, we're going to talk through how we put together our lineups and why it may just work out for our fans. Can you talk me through your roster?
You got it. Okay. So I wanted to build around Julio Jones because he is a monster price, and I think he's going to pay it off. I took Deontay Johnson, and then, of course, Antonio Gibson because he was a value, and I could make a lot of room elsewhere. I want to point out my stack of Chargers. Justin Herbert with that mean-mugging face, although he seems pretty nice to begin with. him to Keenan Allen was something I wanted to absolutely get in my lineup. Keenan Allen for me is a top, 3 potential wideout this week. And then if you see for the price, the payoff is great. So I wanted to add him, and to make sure that I had room, David Johnson was where I ended up saving money. At the running back position against the Jacksonville Jags, you want to take kind of any running back against him, but you've seen David Johnson be the red zone threat. There you saw a passing situation, and here's one on a rushing situation. So for me, I love that value. What'd you have?
All right. I love that, because you and I, we actually had some crossover there. We both had David Johnson in our lineups, as well as the Washington football defense. They are going up this week against the New York Giants. So let's take a look at my full board. You see, I got Drew Lock at the quarterback position. I spent big to get CEH in there, as well as Allen Robinson. Juju, I'm hoping he can have a comeback. Cole Beasley, Noah Fant, scary Terry McLaurin. But let's talk about this Drew Lock pick that I did, because I love this matchup against the Falcons, who have allowed the most fantasy points to quarterbacks this season. Lock is coming off one of his best NFL games, having 3 passing touchdowns versus the Chargers in Week 8. And I also wanted to stack him with the tight end Noah Fant. Now, Fant is on the cusp of tight end 2 greatness, and he also has the 3rd best remaining fantasy schedules for tight ends, and he averages 4 points better in games played with Drew Lock as his quarterback. Now, another one I did, this was my sleeper and value pick. It was Cole Beasley. He's going up against the Seahawks on Sunday. He's had 11 plus fantasy points in 6 of the last 7 games. He played 86% of the snaps out in the slot. That is 6th most amongst all wide receivers. And going up against the Seahawks, they are allowing the most fantasy points to wide receivers this season. They've also allowed 14 top 25 wide receivers in 7 games this season. All right, those were our picks. Hope you make a day of it on Sunday. Good luck, everyone.
Thank you, Kimmy and Cynthia. And now we'll get back to our Sunday showdowns. We're going to look at that Broncos and Falcons game. And Frank, who else are you starting in that one?
You know what? I'm looking at Jerry Jeudy. You know, we've still been waiting for his huge breakout game, something that Justin Jefferson did. We saw CeeDee Lamb earlier this season. But Jeudy has been pretty consistent, at least 10 fantasy points in 4 out of his last 6. He had 10 targets against the Chargers last week, and he's got a great matchup against the Falcons, who've allowed 5 receiving touchdowns to wide receivers in the last 4 games.
I like Judy's matchup too, Rank, but what I don't like is Todd Gurley's matchup this week. Gurley hasn't been giving us a ton of yards. He has just 1 game with over 90 yards. Not a lot of catches. He's averaging less than 2 per game. But what he has given us is plenty of touchdowns. The reason I'm worried is because Denver has only allowed 3 touchdowns to running backs this year. And in both games that Todd Gurley didn't score a touchdown, he scored single-digit fantasy points. And let's not forget, the last time we saw Todd Gurley, we were all scratching our heads wondering why he was off the field for around half of the snaps.
Turn our attention to a classic old school NFC Central matchup between the Lions and the Vikings. And I'm saying you can start DeAndre Swift. He's had 4 or more targets in all but 1 game this season, and still waiting to see what's going to happen with Matthew Stafford. But if he doesn't play, Stafford that is, Swift could end up seeing more targets than that. Plus, he's facing a Vikings defense that's allowed a top 12 fantasy running back in 4 of 7 games. Swift really starting to take over this backfield, and he should be in your lineup.
Yeah, thank you again, Marcus, for telling me to play Swift over Nick Mullins last night. And I like Swift's teammate, Marvin Jones, this week, too. I think he's a sleeper going up against the Minnesota Vikings. Jones has scored 13 or more fantasy points in 2 straight. His volume is going up slightly in those games. And with no Kenny Golladay, it could mean even more targets in a good matchup, as the Vikings have allowed the 3rd most fantasy points and a top 10 wide receiver in 3 straight games.
It's time for Points Counterpoints, where we're checking in on our old nemesis, Steve from accounting. It's annoying enough that he sends you an email that immediately calls you to see if you read it when you haven't even had the opportunity to open up your email yet. But on top of that, he was maybe the only person in the world to start both Devontae Adams and Richie James. I mean, his Thursday Night Football luck is unimaginable. But so now we're in a hole. We got to fight back as we play this weekend. So, Rank, if you need a quarterback to get you some big numbers, say 30 points or more, who are you going to go with?
I like 2 quarterbacks who are available right now, Derek Carr and Drew Lock. But let's focus in on Lock here. I do like his matchup this week against the Atlanta Falcons, who have allowed 2 quarterbacks the top 30 points this season. I do understand that the Falcons have played a lot better over the last week, the last couple of weeks. As a matter of fact, over the last month, they've been around middle of the pack, but this is still a pretty good matchup. And I think what we saw was Drew Lock finally starting to assert himself like we saw at the end of last season. So for somebody who's got a puncher's chance to get that 30 points, give me Drew Lock.
I like the Drew Lock pick this week, and so that means we filled our quarterback spot. So now, if I need a running back that's going to get 25 or more points, I'm going to go and make sure that Dalvin Cook is in my lineup. And I know this seems like a no-brainer, especially after the huge week he had last week. But hey, low-hanging fruit tastes just as good as the stuff at the top of the tree, and you don't have to reach as high to get it. He's had 25 or more in 3 of his last 4 games. He's had at least 1 touchdown in every game he's played. 6 running backs have scored 20 or more against the Detroit Lions, and that includes Nyheim Hines and Jordan Wilkins, who each did it last week. So I think that Dalvin Cook can do at least that and some more, so that will help us sort of close the gap a little bit there. All right, Florio, if we are looking for a wideout that can sort of counteract either Adams or James, who should we be looking at?
I think if you have Terry McLaurin going up against Steve, you're going to be all right. Terry McLaurin this year is averaging, he has a 30% target share that is the 3rd highest amongst wide receivers, 44% air yard share that leads all of the NFL. And it's a good matchup that he can take advantage of that opportunity in, as the Giants are in the top 10 in fantasy points and catches allowed per game to wide receivers, and just outside the top 10 in yards and touchdowns allowed.
All right, Steve, you may be smug now, but your comeuppance, it is on its way. All right, let's get back to some more Sunday showdowns. We'll go with Dolphins and Cardinals. Rank, who are you starting?
Well, I'm going to be looking at Devontae Parker. If you're not comfortable going with Tua Tagovailoa, but still want a little bit of action in this game, I think Parker's got a pretty good opportunity going up against the Cardinals, who've allowed a top 10 fantasy wide receiver in 3 consecutive games. One of those was Tyler Lockett, who had 53 points. I'm not saying that Parker's going to have 53 points, but I think he's got a good opportunity to get you close to 20.
I'm looking at Kyler Murray, and I'm saying beware. I'm not telling you to sit Kyler Murray, but over the past 4 weeks, the Dolphins have really been locking down on fantasy quarterbacks. And I will admit that some of the opponents have not been the strongest, but this has still been a very aggressive defense. And the one thing you can say about the Dolphins is they held Russell Wilson to his lowest point total of the year. So you probably don't have any better options. You're probably going to start Kyler Murray, but I would be a little bit cautious about what you expect from him this week. That'll move us over to the Texans and the Jaguars. While I'm wary about Kyler Murray, I am all systems go for Deshaun Watson. He's had 4 straight games with 20 or more fantasy points. In his last 4, 11 touchdowns and 2 interceptions, facing the Jaguars, who've given up the 4th most fantasy points per game to the position. Back in week 5, Deshaun Watson got them for nearly 25 fantasy points in that one.
That's weird, Marcus. So if I'm listening to you correctly, you're saying Watson over Kyler Murray, which is what I said in the B block. But anyways, we're not doing breaking the ranks right now. DJ Chark is a player that I'm going to be looking at. I know I'm getting a lot of questions about it because Jake Luton is going to be the starting quarterback for the Jags, and you're all worried about it. You know what? You never heard of Gardner Minshew before he started dealing either, so don't even worry about it. What you need to worry about is this matchup against the Houston Texans, who've allowed a top 5 fantasy wide receiver in 3 of their last 4 games, the 6th most fantasy points to receivers since week 4. So DJ Chark is going to be the most targeted guy on Sunday, so get him into your lineup.
All right, finally, we've got the New York Football Giants against the Washington Football Team in a classic baseball matchup. Anyone you feeling good about rolling out here, Florio?
Yeah, I'm feeling good about Evan Ingram. I like to look for players who are getting opportunities and now heading into a good matchup, and Evan Ingram is getting opportunity. He's at the 6th most targets amongst tight ends, including at least 9 in 2 straight games. And while Washington is really tough against the run and against stopping receivers, their one weakness is tight ends. They've allowed the 9th most fantasy points, the 8th most yards to the position. I think you could start Evan Ingram this week.
I'm going to check out some surprising sleepers presented by Geico. Each week, our Michael F. Florio posts his list of fantasy sleepers to NFL.com/fantasy. Go check them out there. So, Florio, lead us off. Who is one of your surprising sleepers for week 9?
This week, I have Mecole Hardman as a sleeper, and I know it's not the best matchup in the world for him, but last week he saw a season high in targets, receptions, yards, and fantasy points, and I'm just hoping he can build off of that. He is so explosive, and he plays with Patrick Mahomes that matchups don't matter. All you really need for him is some opportunity to go his way, and he can have a big fantasy day.
I like that one, Florio, but it's Quintez Cephas season. I know. Listen, he's available in 100% of NFL.com leagues. You've probably never even heard of this guy. He hasn't been active since week 4. The reason why, he plays Kenny Galladay's position. So now that Kenny Galladay was back, he wasn't going to play. But now that Kenny Galladay is out, I should say, that means he's going to be active hopefully this Sunday. He's going up against the Vikings, who've allowed the 3rd most fantasy points per game this season to wide receivers. So if you're desperate for a wide receiver, look at Quintez Cephas.
I looked at Quintez Cephas early in the year, and now I'm scared. But I will take your advice. I will also advise that you give Damian Harris a shot this week. And keep an eye on Sony Michel. He's designated to return from IR, but Harris has run well enough to really still be the lead running back in the Patriots' backfield. And this week, a pretty good matchup going against the Jets, who've given up the 8th most fantasy points per game to the position.
Yeah, another surprising running back I like this week is Jordan Howard. I don't care that he's averaging 28 inches per carry this year. Myles Gaskin is on IR. Matt Breida is out this week. Someone here has to carry the ball. I don't think they're going to ask Tua to throw, 40 plus times. So I think in the absence of Gaskins and Breida, they're going to rely on Jordan Howard. And we know if there's a goal line carry, it's going to go his way.
Yeah, well, from one former Bear to a current Chicago Bear, I'm going to go with Darnell Mooney, who has really started to take a more active role in this offense. He had close to 18 fantasy points against the Saints in week 8, 11 targets of 20 air yards or more since week 4. That's tied for the most in the NFL. And he's got a great matchup this week against the Tennessee Titans, who've allowed the 2nd most fantasy points to wide receivers this season. If you watch the tape on him, he's been really good. There was a play against the Rams a couple of weeks ago where he put Jalen Ramsey on skates. Nick Foles wasn't able to get him the ball, but you know what? I'm looking at the talent here, and I'm looking at Darnell Mooney.
Welcome back to NFL Fantasy Live, where we're coming back to reality. Now, there were some waiver wire pickups that might have carried us early in the year, but now it's week 9. Reality started to set in, and so now we may be putting him on the bench or back on the waiver wire. Adam Rank, who has come back to life, or to reality rather, for you?
Well, I'm going to go with Robbie Anderson, who, people thought that when the Panthers signed him, they're like, what are they doing here? We got DJ Moore. And then all of a sudden, Robbie Anderson became one of the best receivers in all of football through weeks 1 through 5, when he was actually the wide receiver 10. But since week 6, he has been outside the top 30. So to me, I'm going to have to put him onto the bench, because I think that's where he probably belongs for right now, especially this week against the Chiefs.
Yeah. Scotty Miller, it's been real, but it is over now. Scotty Miller has scored single digits in 3 of his last 4 games, and that was with Chris Godwin being in and out of the lineup and no Antonio Brown. Now ahead of him in the pecking order for targets is Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, Antonio Brown, Rob Gronkowski, and maybe even a running back or 2. Just throw Scotty Miller back to the waiver wire.
Rustin Cole taught us that time is a flat circle. We began this year not thinking much about Adrian Peterson. Then he had a couple of nice games, but he hasn't had more than 60 scrimmage yards in a game since week 3, and really just 9 targets compared to 29 for DeAndre Swift. So now we're back to not really thinking so much about Adrian Peterson as much. Swift is starting to take over that backfield. He's getting more opportunities. I mentioned earlier that he's a guy that I really liked in this ball game this week coming up for the Detroit Lions. So at this point, I think we can sort of move on from Adrian Peterson, and I think it would be best for our fantasy purposes if maybe the Detroit Lions decided that they would kind of move on from Adrian Peterson and give DeAndre Swift some more opportunities. Please. All right. That'll pretty much do it for us. We appreciate you watching. Be sure to tune in Monday, 6 p.m. Eastern. We talk Patriots, Jets on Monday Night Football. Enjoy the games this weekend. We'll see you then.